Well, thank you, Nancy, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you all for inviting me and having me here. As a Swedish person, I'm particularly excited about the weather forecast. We're coming out of winter time, which is usually cold, dark, wet, perhaps snowy. And certainly in the southern part of Sweden, where I come from, we don't get much snow, which is white and beautiful. We get the sort of black, brownish, wet kind of snow that disappears within 1 or 2 days. So I'm excited to see that the sun is coming out. I got to bring flip-flops for the hot weather tomorrow. And I'm really excited to be here. I took a walk around campus yesterday, and it's really, really beautiful. And I envy you all having such a beautiful campus. So, well, you heard about my background story and who I am. And I'm a passionate academic developer. That's more or less my identity. I have a background in speech therapy and speech pathology. But as a student, my teachers suddenly changed the whole program delivery. So they changed from a more conventional format into problem-based learning, which was an eye-opener to many of us. It suited me very well, but it suited some of my fellow students much less good. And that started my thinking, how can we learn in different ways? And how can instructors and people who are responsible for delivering an education, how can they learn what best suits their discipline, their students, their way of instructing? So that was my way into this 16 years ago. So I'm now a passionate person who sort of look into how can we get faculty members to be proud of what they're doing, knowing what they're doing and why they're doing it, not only based on their disciplines, but also about knowledge about teaching and learning. Okay, so when I say teachers, I will probably use that word mainly because that's the way we frame the instructors in the Swedish higher education system. But that means all people who are instructors who are teaching within our universities. Okay, so they may be researchers as well. They may be other kind of staff who also support our students. But so I will use the word teachers for that. And as Nancy say, I want to acknowledge that the work that I'm presenting here, it's part of my PhD thesis that I finalized a couple of years ago. It looks like this, and I've actually got a few copies if you're interested towards the end. You can have them. But I also want to acknowledge that this work is done very much in collaboration with my colleague Torgny Roxo, who is also part of this way of thinking about academic development. So let's get started in terms of significant conversations and promoting a learning culture. One start, and this connects very well to the poster award actually. This is me swimming in an ocean with, well, roughly 12 or 15 meters to the bottom. On my side is my daughter, and by then she was, I think, 12 years old. Why would anyone actually want to learn something new? I think that's a question that deserves a bit thinking about. Why would instructors want to change their teaching or develop their teaching? Why would students actually want to learn what instructors want them to learn? And I'm going to present one perspective. There are many perspective and learning theories out there, and there's lots of research into this question. But I'm going to focus on one, which is the sociocultural perspective of learning. The sociocultural perspective on learning says that we want to learn something new because people who are significant know these things. They know how to do these things. So people who are significant to us will sort of motivate us to learn different things. In my case, I'm into freediving. This is not only snorkeling, as it may look from the slides. It's freediving, where you dive into the water as deep as you can, or you swim for as long as you can underneath on one breath. You don't have the oxygen tubes. And my 3 kids started doing this when they were young. They are still in this, and I'll return to that. And that motivated me to start doing this, to see if I could challenge myself into this very peculiar sport. So this builds on a perspective from social psychology that the significant others, and when we say significant conversations, that relies back to significant others. Those are the people that we let ourselves be influenced by, okay? So the significant in this word, or the combination of significant conversations, is really significant. It means that we change our way of thinking, or we're challenged, or we're supported to dare to move outside of our comfort zones. It's not just everyday conversations, okay? And that's important to remember. Now, if we look into academia, who is most influential? Academia is a very peculiar place if you look at it from an organizational perspective. And most of us who are part of universities realize that this is a special place. You can't really compare it to a military organization or a corporate business or even a sports organization. Academia is a peculiar place in itself. And people have been looking into this, of course. Most things have been researched. These are the people who are most influential in our organization. So you can have, in my case, my university was founded in 1666. We have 50,000 students, we have 6,000 faculty members, and if our rector, who is the top person at the university level, makes a decision, what happens is that everyone out there in different faculties and departments start discussing, is this something that we should go with? What do we think about this? No, it's not a very good decision. We'll just skip it and just move on with our business as usual. That would not happen in a military organization, for instance. However, if a colleague who's significant to us says, shouldn't we go this way? Shouldn't we change things in this way? Shouldn't we try this? That's when we start to listen. So it's very much a collegial culture, you might say. Now, this has been criticized and problematized as well. I won't go into that, but for sure, colleagues make a huge difference in how we think and what we do. And this has also been researched, the culture of universities, and Bjørn Stensaker is a professor of education in Norway. He's also been doing lots and lots of research on how do universities actually change? What roles, for instance, do policies have? And basically on the side, they don't matter all that much. So he concludes, in this organization, that means university, authority concerning the quality of teaching and learning would not follow the hierarchical, but rather the informal structure, and through mechanisms such as socialization and training. And our students, of course, become part of that. As soon as students step inside our corridors and inside our classrooms, as instructors and as teachers, we are role models. We are the ones that students may identify with and start thinking, is that kind of person I want to become? Is that the kind of knowledge I want to develop? Is that the kind of skills I want to develop? We have a quite interesting investigation in my university, in the physics department, and nothing bad said about the physics department, but they were troubled by the very low numbers of students who took their continuation courses. So they had lots of students at the first level, and then very few students at, forthcoming levels, or, yeah. So they did an investigation and asked students in focus groups, why do you not continue? You've started off really good in this physics course, why do you not continue? And the main answer that the students said were that we don't want to become like the old men in the basement of the physics department. So there you have socialization and role modeling, and that was sort of a nut to crack for the physics department, obviously. And unless you know that this actually plays out quite significantly, you can't do anything about it. So you have to start asking questions. What are we doing? How can we improve this? How can we change? What can we do differently? So I've brought the sunflowers here just because it's a beautiful picture, and also to actually sort of support the fact that the culture that we work in, the culture that we're part of, is really the way we orient ourselves. Maybe not as equally as the sunflowers towards the sun, because we're all individuals. You know the Monty Python sketch, and every academic is an individual. I'm an expert on my own, and I'm an individualist, and I do my own thing, and I have my academic freedom and the autonomy. Yes, but still we are very much influenced by our colleagues and the culture that we're part of. And I want to just connect this a bit more in depth in relation to teaching. What does the institutional culture, what kind of role does it play? Well, there are two rather recent and very big studies looking into this. Riddle and Hay had a survey approach looking at 30,000 college graduates and asked them about their employments, their workplace engagement, and their overall well-being many years after graduation. And they concluded, the responses from the alumni students said that the institutional culture that valued teaching and the learning and faculty development was essential for them. So not only is it essential for the experience of the students when they are with us during the programs, but it actually also affects them in their life afterwards. And I mean after the education, not other kinds of life afterwards. The second reference is also looking at institutions that have really good outcomes on graduation rates and levels of students' engagement. And the same goes again, that they can see institutions where the culture is supportive of educational development, of innovation, and really open-minded. So it's not like gearing towards one way of teaching students, this is how you should do it, but trying to encourage continuous development all the time. They see positive relation. So I want you to take a minute to start thinking about what is it like here. So turn to your neighbor and take a couple of minutes to think about what is the institutional culture in your institution. I know most of you are from the University of Calgary, but if you're from another institution, feel free to reflect upon that. What is it like in your institution? What's the learning culture? What's the institutional culture in terms of supporting development of teaching and development of student learning? Go ahead. I'm not applauding myself. This is just an old speech therapy trick, because if you try with your voice as a teacher to sort of overcome the buzzing in a room like this, you will actually affect your voice and become tired in your vocal cords. Maybe some of you have experienced that. So a good advice is just clap your hands or whistle or knock the table or something until people have become quiet again. So I'm not going to dive into this, but I want to leave it with you for future conversations over the breaks and throughout the day, because one part, I think, of having a conference like this is exactly to develop, to support a learning culture and a culture that embraces the development of teaching and student learning. And I suppose that's why you're all here. Let me share you a bit of the challenges that we have at Lund University. As I said, it was founded in 1666. It's a very, very research-intensive European university. It has got, I say, a high tails. Can you say that in English? That's a Swedish expression. You know, like when dogs walk with high tails? Really priding itself with who we are, and that means who we are mostly in research. Teaching has been good because people are really good in their disciplines. They are doing good in their research. But as in many other institutions across the world, there's no one-one relationship to being a good researcher and then being a good teacher, as we all probably know. And also teaching historically has been treated and talked about in my institution as very private. So people talk about my class, my course. They go in, they meet their students, they do things in their teaching, and the colleagues don't know about it. If there were bad course evaluations, no one else would know about it than the individual. So one of the things that we've been trying to do, and we've been trying to do this now for 15 years, and that's part of my thesis, looking at Lund University as a case study, trying to change that culture from being very private into being a more collegial teaching culture, where colleagues actually talk about their teaching, even talk about challenges and problems in their teaching, but also talk about things that are working fine, doing good. Because we need to understand, why is it working fine? Is it because I'm a really brilliant lecturer, or is it because of other reasons? Can we investigate that and document and describe that? Then that can be shared more widely than just staying with me as my personal private knowledge. And as you probably can recognize, this is based then on the scholarship of teaching and learning, doing inquiries into your own teaching, trying to understand why it works or how it could develop, and then trying to document that and spread it at the local level, at the institution. So we have conferences like this also when people share things that they've done. And that brings me back to the start of that process that Nancy was talking about, the research that me and my colleagues have been doing over the past decade or so, is again looking at culture and looking at how culture is constructed. It is constructed through day-to-day interactions and meaningful conversations. So I wanted you to take a moment to think about this question. Try and count. And I'm talking about the conversations that matter. So just give me a hand raised. How many of you talk to, in terms of conversations that matter, with a number between 0 to 5 people? Raise your hands. Quite a lot. And how many of you have between 5 to 10 conversational partners? Yeah. It's roughly half and half. Does anyone have more than 10? Yeah, a few. Good. Congratulations. You basically confirm our research results. Thank you very much for doing that. I can now add a number of another 100 to the things that we've been doing. The reason that we started asking this question was that there was a professor in Norway. His name is Gunnar Handal. He's now more than 80 years old and still going strong. He once asked this question many, many years ago. I think it's 20 years ago, when he ran a pedagogical course for instructors at the University of Oslo. And someone answered, I don't talk to my colleagues about teaching. That would be like asking about their personal hygiene. Like, how often do you shower? Or how often do you change your socks? And that really got us going. And in combination with a book that is called Academic Tribes and Territories by Tony Beecher and Paul Trowler. If you haven't read it, it's a wonderful book. They investigate the disciplines and people who inhabit disciplines as tribes and territories, but they're only looking at research. And they're concluding that most people have a very tight, small network of people with whom they discuss like research ideas, they show them drafts of articles, they really trust these people. So the whole book is about research and nothing about teaching. But that got us going to try and investigate, do people talk about teaching at all? Or is it, like Gunnar Handal said, it's about the personal hygiene? So we did this very, very simple diagram that we distributed to academics in our own university from different disciplines and faculties. Where do you find your conversational partners? So those are the ones that you have conversations that matter with. And they just put crosses in this simple diagram. Are they within your subject? Are they within your department, the university, or elsewhere? And the reason for differing between subject and department is that many departments in our university are like 300 people and consisting of several subjects within one department. So the department is like a bigger thing within the organization. And then, after putting crosses here, where do they find them? 1 cross per person. How do you rate your local culture within your department or your subject group with regards to conversations about teaching and learning? So in the one end, very supportive and positive, and in the other end, very negative. Okay? So very simple diagram. And this is 2 respondents from our investigation. Here's number 1. I don't know if it's a he or a she, but at least that person has one other person that he talks to or she talks to about teaching and learning. And that person also thinks that the local culture is quite insupportive of those kinds of conversations. And here's another example. Number 2. As you can see, that person has, I don't know, roughly 5, 10, 13 other people distributed across the subject, the department, the university, and even outside the university. And that person thinks that their local culture is much more supportive of these kinds of conversations. And that's a conclusion from the study that we did with more than 100 participants, that the more supportive the local culture is of those kinds of conversations, the more your closer colleagues you will have those kinds of conversations with. If you're in a culture that doesn't support it, you will still find someone. So no one in our material had no one to talk to. You will still find someone, even if it's your wife or husband at home at the kitchen table, trying to have conversations and meaningful conversations about your teaching issues. So that's one of the significant results of this, that if we want to try and develop a learning culture, we need more of the significant conversations within the collegial, departmental, or subject culture. So we illustrated this and called this significant networks, and this is published work also. So if you think of the 3 red stars here, we all think that academics are stars, so that's the symbol here. They will all have their significant networks, the other people, between 5 to 10 in total usually, that they will have these kinds of conversations with. But if you take an organizational look at this, and you frame this within a department, the significant network can stretch beyond these organizational boundaries, and they usually do. So it becomes sort of a messy, complex image within an organization when we try to understand this. But it's for sure, and this research has been repeated in many different countries around the world, and this image and this thing is confirmed over and over again. So if we try to think of that significant network as a supportive group of individuals, and we can say that an academic discipline or a subgroup or unit or work group could be a supportive group of individuals. So we can keep the academic freedom, the autonomy on behalf of the instructors. This is a group of people from my freediving club. And you can compete in freediving, but you always compete as an individual. So this is an image from the Swedish National Championships a couple of years ago. And these are all from my club. And there were a total of 50, competitors? Is that the word? Yeah. And what they did from my club was to decide, as you can see, to wear the same kind of T-shirts, which sort of has our club logo on it. And they decided to support each other. So whenever it was someone's turn, and this competition is indoors, so you get into a pool and you're supposed to either just lie still there and hold your breath for as long as you can. The record in this competition is 8 minutes. Don't try that at home. Or you swim for as long as you can underneath the water with fins, and you have a mask but no snorkel because you only have one breath. And the record here is 230 meters. So this is sort of serious business. And what they did was supporting each other. So whenever one of them was competing in the water, the others were prepping beforehand, cheering, giving feedback, helping out, trying to relax together, doing all these kinds of things that helped everyone, and still they compete actually against each other. So I think that is a great symbol for what we're trying to achieve in academia, and certainly in my unit, because everyone should be allowed to do things in their own way and along their own capacities, but you can always support your colleagues as a group as well. You don't have to work as a group, but you can be a supportive group that supports the individual that constitutes the group. Okay, so that takes me back to my research and my thesis and a model of an organization in academia, or actually a model of knowledge-intensive organizations. So this is a framework adapted from Hannah and Lester in 2009, where we in academic development, I don't know if Nancy would agree, but I think historically academic development, the field that I work in, has focused either on the far left-hand side, the micro level, supporting individuals to improve their teaching and understand more about their student learning. Or we have focused on the far right-hand side, the macro level, the institutional level, trying to develop underpinned and well-formulated strategies and policies that should go for the whole institution and support the development of teaching and learning. Much less research and focus and attention has been the level in the middle, which is called the meso level, and the group level. And in my experience, that's where the real sort of thing happens. Because we have met in the pedagogical courses that we offer and workshops and seminars in my unit since 1969 in my university. We have met individuals who become really inspired, they want to try something new, they go back to their colleagues and they say, oh, I was so inspired after taking this course, but actually my colleagues either say, oh, we tried that in the 1960s, it won't work. Or they try something, and actually sometimes students are quite conservative. Sorry, having trouble finding the word. So they have sort of gone back to status quo many times, over and over again. We can see, and there's research being done, that the value of pedagogical courses depends on the group level, the meso level, how the group actually values that kind of new knowledge that you can bring back as an individual. We have also seen, and there's lots of research looking at what role does policy play, or strategies, you know, like documents that an organization shares on their website saying, this is how we think about teaching, or this is how we develop. And every university across Europe is now saying we should be world leading and excellent in research, and we are doing internationalization, we are doing all of these buzzwords. And we know for a fact from a lot of organizational research that that doesn't have more than a marginal effect. So again, it comes back to the meso level where these two things meet, and the group culture, the learning culture within the group, will actually decide what effect this will have. Do you recognize that? Mm-hmm. Mm. There's actually a concept from organizational theory that is bohica. Have you heard of that? Bohica means bend over, here it comes again. And you have a university policy, you bend over, and you hope it just goes away, and then you get up again and you do business as usual. And this is, of course, very, very cynical. But it's there, and it's been proven over and over again. So, what we've been doing for the past years, myself and Torgny Roxo, is looking at this group level. In the original model, they call it semi-autonomous knowledge networks, and we call it microcultures. Microculture is a group of people working together somehow. They might share a subject, they might share offices in a corridor, being part of the same department. They may all be teaching on the same program. They may be a teaching team that actually together develop a curriculum and teach together and have these kinds of meaningful conversations. They could be just any kind of group. And over time, they develop their own traditions and habits and values and norms that basically, can, in a nutshell, can be described as the way we do things around here. And the easiest way to see those things is for a newcomer. A newcomer comes into a group and starts thinking, why do you do things like that? Why do you talk about the students like that? Why do you do assessment like this? Because when you're new, that's when you see these norms and values. After a while, you've integrated them so you don't see them anymore. You just take them for granted. I'm going to share one story. I think I have the time for that. One story is a participant from our business school who attended a pedagogical course. He's quite junior, he's a PhD student, but all PhD students in my university also teach. So he's on our business program, and it was time for him to grade student essays. And he was asking a very senior colleague about how to do this kind of grading. And the senior colleague said, you should do the grading with the lowest possible points on each essay, because all the students will complain anyway. They always do. And then you can raise the points slightly, and the students will be satisfied. So now, nothing bad about the business faculty in my university, but there is a microculture in there having this kind of norm. So the guy who participated in our pedagogical course, they are all required to write papers, scholarly papers. He wrote a paper called "The Enemy Among Us?" describing what he perceived his own microculture was. And he was reading into research about the value of feedback to students, developing feedback, feed forward, and he wanted to do things completely differently. So you can see how the things you want to do might clash with your microculture that you're part of. And he certainly was experiencing that. Anyway, our interest in these groups led to a study that has been, let me see. Whoa, sorry. I'm going to share another place. We looked into 5 groups, 5 microcultures across our university from different faculties, different disciplines. And this is one of them. It's called K. And they all describe it as a place that people return to. So when you've been a student there, you've been a PhD, you might go for a postdoc, you actually want to come back. It's an attractive place to be part of. When we went there and interviewed leaders, senior teachers, and students. It's a long corridor with offices, and all the doors are open. And people are sort of shouting friendly to each other across that corridor. So like, hey, I'm giving a lecture the day after tomorrow. Do you want to join to see whether we can make something joint afterwards, or whether you can build on that when you do your lecture next week? They bring their students to excursions. They even bring them to scientific conferences. These are their master students. And when they bring them to scientific conferences, the students are introduced as future colleagues. So can you see the difference between that microculture and the one that thinks of their students as the enemy among us? It's a completely different way of thinking and talking about students. Teachers sit in on each other's lectures. The teaching material used in every lecture, every seminar is collected centrally in one office, so that it's available and accessible for everyone to build upon, to use, to copy, to develop further if they want to. There's a formal leader who's very energetic in pushing development forward. There's a new teacher that we interviewed here. He's a PhD student. He came from a completely other discipline. And he had this idea of a new course that they could develop. And he was immediately given responsibility, with support from other colleagues, to run his own course in collaboration along with his ideas. So they sort of welcome new ideas and try to support the development of those new ideas, rather than defending and saying, no, we don't have any money for that, and that's probably not a good idea, etc. And this particular microculture are always present when we have our campus teaching and learning conferences. So they are very active in scholarship of teaching and learning, sharing their kinds of work and being interested in what others do as well. So this is just one example. And in our original report, we have the other 5 described as quite thick sort of descriptions and cases. What we developed from that, is a model. And this is the green thing here is the report. It's available online as well if you're interested. A model to describe strong academic microcultures. And when I say strong, that's strong in research as well as in teaching, because that's the way it has to be in order to be acknowledged in my university. You can't be strong and good in teaching and weak in research, because then you would just be dismissed. So the model consists of various things, also from literature, but was very much confirmed in our study. So if you look at the stars in the middle, all these 5 strong microcultures had very dense interactions between each other and the members. And these were microcultures ranging from 10 people to 60 people. So even with the ones that were 60 people, they met twice a day and had coffee together, all 60 of them, and having conversations about what was on the agenda at the moment, what was up today. The head of department had some kind of information that he shared, or someone else had information that they shared, and everyone was there. And we asked, are you sure? Is everyone actually there every day? And they said, well, you're forgiven if you have a grant application deadline the next day. Then you're forgiven for not coming to the coffee. But actually, yes, everyone participates because it's valued. Those conversations are really valued within this group. And if you look at the arrows that are sort of moving in and outwards of this circle in the middle, that signifies that all these microcultures, they run the risk, of course, of being very dense and tight in their internal interactions. You run the risk of finally sort of having your own ideas taken for granted so much that you can't develop new ideas. But they were actively all the time seeking collaborations outside, bringing in new ideas, bringing in money that they could share and do things with, so that they were very, very aware of the risk of becoming very sort of closed, and therefore actively seeking collaboration outside of their own group as well. But the important thing is that no one else should tell them who to collaborate with. So one of the groups, the K that I showed you just earlier, they are part of a bigger department. So they are one group of roughly 10 or 12 people. And the department consists of other groups, I think 5 other, you could define them as microcultures. And the head of that department had an idea to say that let's build a program for students that goes across all these microcultures. And that might be a fair idea from a department head. But this small group said, no, no, no. We don't want to collaborate with people just because someone else who's sort of high-ranked tells us to. We want to find the people that we want to collaborate with on our own, ourselves. So as a leader, you can imagine it's a difficult thing to lead those kinds of strong microcultures as well, but that's another issue. Finally, they were very much influenced by what we call their saga, their ideas of who they were and where they came from and why their culture was as it was. And one of these groups was more than 200 years old. It's one of the oldest disciplines in our university. And of course, they're very much influenced by how it has been before. But that is balanced by what you see on the right-hand side here, the enterprise. The enterprise comes from Wenger and the idea of communities of practice. And that is the idea of why we're here. What are we doing and what do we want to achieve with what we're doing? And they said things like, we want to change society. We want to educate students that can go out there and change society. And this is a group of 12 people. So you can imagine the challenge that they've taken up themselves, but that is what they want to do. Another group said, well, none of the research that we're doing actually matters, and they are world leading in their research field. You should know that. They're world leading, #1 in their research field. But they say what really matters is our undergraduate students and what they bring with them out into the industry, what we learn them, because they will change industry. That's our ultimate goal. Our research will not change industry. That's just other academics reading our research. The students and what they bring with them will change the industry, and that's our enterprise. So you can see it's these big ideas, not formulated like measurable objectives, but rather like fundamental values of what they're doing and why they're doing it. Okay, now the most common question that we get when we present this is, of course, if you're not a strong microculture like this, how can you become one? And we don't have the answer to that yet. We're trying to figure out. What we have done is more theoretically and conceptually, and this is mostly my colleague Torgny who did this in his thesis, looking at different types of microcultures. Everyone is not a strong one like the one I described. So he's come up with a model of 4 different types of microcultures. And of course, as soon as you make types out of something, you miss out of the complexity and everything. So we have to recognize that. But what we have found out is that it seems as if the level of trust is important. So the internal level of trust towards your colleagues internally is significant. And also on the left-hand side, an experience of a shared responsibility. So that's something that all the strong microcultures had. And those two dimensions seem to be crucial when we try to identify different kinds of microcultures. And Torgny came up with these metaphors. And of course, there are problems with metaphors. But basically, the strong ones that we looked into had high level of trust and a strong sense of a shared responsibility. And that is called a commons, after Elinor Ostrom's and others' work, where you take a common shared responsibility for something, for sharing and developing that commons. The other one, where you have a low level of trust, but a high sense of shared responsibility, would be a market. I look after myself. We're all in here, but we're actually competing, if it comes to that. And at the lower hand side, you see the club with no experience of a shared responsibility, but a high sense of trust. So that would be like the English gentleman's club, where you sit and have a brandy and you pat each other on the shoulder, and you'll always support each other no matter what you're talking about, but you're actually not sharing a responsibility for anything. And the final one would be low level of trust and no sense of a shared responsibility, more or less a square. Who are all these people? We're just located in the same building. I don't know who they are or why we're here together. And we certainly have heard in our university the metaphor of a hotel of researchers. Do you have that in English? So in Swedish, that would be a forskarhotel. As if our faculties and the buildings of our university campus was just a hotel for researchers to check in, sit in their own rooms, doing their own research, and checking out if they don't like the service and the breakfast, you know. That would be a square. So we're trying to think whether this fits with people's experiences, and when we have presented this, it seems as if most people say that they can map their own environment into one of these squares, but there's much knowledge to be built further on. So let's just wrap up, I think, with the idea of, building a microculture. If we want to develop a microculture, do you recognize what this is? You were laughing. You know, I just found out the other day, I'm not a hockey fan. I just found out that the Swedish junior team actually won the Junior World Championship in 2012 in Calgary. Sorry, I just had to bring that one. I hope I'm not offending anyone. But the challenge of building a microculture, a group that trusts each other and have a sense of a shared responsibility, how can you do that? Well, there are a lot of similarities, I think, with building a team, getting a team to work together, getting a team to trust each other, to have a sense of, even if you and I do different things, you do it well and you do it on behalf of all of us, and I do the same thing. So taking that responsibility and not thinking that if Nancy gets bad course evaluations, that's her problem, not mine. It's our problem. And how can we help each other to develop and see what the problem might be? How can that be dealt with? Because if one gets a bad reputation, we all do. We're all in this together. That's the idea. So I just want to wrap up with a sort of theoretical, conceptual thing that is in my thesis. And this has much to do with academic development. At the meso level, we think that the idea is to build both weak and strong ties, and this comes from network theory. Weak ties are the links between the clusters and the microcultures. So the things that you're doing when you're talking to each other here at this conference is building weak links. You can bring ideas back to your own groups. You can try those out and say, hey, do you know that in the maths department they tried this and this? Don't you think that's something we could try? We could actually invite someone from the math department and tell us what they've been doing and see whether we could adapt that to our students in our courses. That's building weak links. And what we have come to conclude based on the model of communities of practice partly and scholarship of teaching and learning is that for that you need arenas. You need places within the microcultures where you actually can have conversations about teaching and learning, like departmental seminars or lunches, brown bag lunches or something very simple, but still places where you can talk about teaching, where you actually meet your colleagues and talk about teaching. And you also need that at the campus level, of course. So this conference is a great thing. We think that we need artifacts, and those can be like posters, papers, presentations, things that are tangible and that are also movable across the university. So of course a person can come and talk about what they did in the math department. But if many are interested in that, that person will not have time to come everywhere and present their work. So if there's a paper written, or if there's a newsletter where this is displayed to everyone, for everyone to read, that creates artifacts that are actually accessible across the organization. Brokers are people like me and Nancy and others who work with sort of bringing that knowledge from one place to another. And could be also people from one group visiting another group, sorry. So people who are carrying information and knowledge between groups, you might say. And Wenger writes a lot about that. I also think, and I want to stress, that if we want to achieve this and to be able to achieve it, we need a strong leadership. And I'm not talking now about the president of the organization, but people who are educational, local level leaders, program leaders. We have something called directors of studies. We have department chairs. Those people need to be able to support this and sometimes initiate it for it to start. But that's not necessary, but they are an important player in this. Okay. Nancy shared this the other day, and it struck me that it was very much in alignment with our messages from the microcultures. I don't know if you've read it, The Chronicle of Higher Education. Survey data from more than 3,600 recently tenured associate professors at doctoral universities found that their organizational commitment hinged far more on whether they believed they worked in a caring, supportive environment than on their sense that administrators had undertaken broad efforts to support the faculty. I think both are needed, actually. But definitely the caring, supporting, sometimes challenging, but still critically friendly, supportive and challenging culture, the microculture that we're part of, does have influence and effects. So I'm going to wrap up with one advice. You remember I said the big group that had coffee every morning? We have something in Sweden called fika. Do you know about fika? Yes, you do. Great. It's the coffee break, basically, in Sweden. It's called fika because the coffee break always comes with a cinnamon bun or a piece of chocolate, and in the morning with a small sandwich. And that's the informal possibility to gather and have informal but significant conversations about what we do. So, of course, you can't just start fika and hope that the microculture will completely change. But it's one step on the way to have those kinds of informal conversations and take the opportunity of having the informal conversations about teaching and learning that could develop into a supportive learning culture. And this has actually been researched. So Viveka, who's on the slide there, say and conclude that we meet under informal circumstances, we exchange information and comment on what's happening. The hierarchy breaks down during the fika. We're all in it together, regardless of power and position. So fika is really, really a powerful tool to getting these informational conversations going. Thank you.